What's up, everybody? It is March 22nd, 2017, and this is another edition of the MMA Ratings Podcast. My name is Raphael Garcia, and my partner, Schwan Humes, is coming in a little while. But as usual, we have more than a lot to talk about when it comes to the world of mixed martial arts this week. It's a pretty light week because there are no events this weekend, so we won't have anything to look forward to when it comes to discussing MMA, but we will have a lot to talk about from this past week of news and last week's action. And talk about some mixed martial arts action. Today we're going to be looking at UFC Fight Night 107. Excuse me. Looking back at the results from that event in London, out in the O2 Arena. We're going to be talking about that. And then we're going to look at, again, like I said, just look at some of the news from this past week. We're going to be talking about Gary Tony versus Shinya Aoki, that grappling match that was just announced in one championship. We're talking about some big signings for Bellator, War Machine, Nate Diaz. Yeah, that's pretty much about it. Pretty smooth show today. Light. We have a light agenda, but that is what it is. Especially when you look at the April schedule, because April schedule is hectic. Four events for UFC. Who knows how many other countless grappling, Bellator events. There's going to be a lot to talk about. So let's kind of close it out today with something a little bit more low key. So first things first, I wanted to look at UFC Fight Night 107, last week's action, which was pretty exciting. This is another edition, man. It was a card that didn't jump off the page, but it still brought enough action, especially with the later fights in the evening. Excuse me, guys. It's been a long week, kind of tired. Excuse me about that, but it was a good event from start to finish. Didn't really have too many complaints. I remember talking last week about whether or not I was even going to watch this show because there wasn't a lot of big names on this card, which was definitely a problem, but which is definitely something that kind of deters a lot of people away, and it makes it a little bit hard to cover a lot of these showcases because there's so much else going on at the time. There was actually some interesting conversation on Luke Thomas's live chat today, talking about whether or not the UFC is neglecting Fight Pass, because there haven't been as many Fight Pass exclusive events, which is noticeable, and a lot of people were just like, well, what's really going on with that platform? And I think that's a good question to ask. I personally enjoy it because it allows me to continue watching some some grappling, which I believe is actually I was thinking about earlier today about working on a piece about the growth of competitive grappling, and with EBI being on Fight Pass, that definitely makes it valuable to me. It makes it worth the $10 a month that I pay and write off at the end of the year, but that's another conversation for another day. But for those people who are not exclusively interested in the world of grappling, I see how it can be a struggle to embrace paying $10 for UFC Fight Pass every month, especially that many big events on there anymore. I remember back when they had Joanna Jędrzejczyk defend her title on that platform, or when they did I think this was before UFC 200, where they featured a Thursday night event on Fight Pass. I think that was a Rose Namajunas Paige Van Zant fight. They featured that on Fight Pass, and then the rest of the went through the rest of the cards. But either way, it's pretty interesting to see what will be next with that platform. It's funny because I wondered if Fight Pass would be. I believe Fight Pass was around before the WWE Network. I'm kind of getting off topic here, but it is what it is. Fight Pass was around before the WWE Network, so but it's definitely the network has definitely grown leaps and bounds beyond that because the WWE Network was kind of seen as I don't want to say it was seen as a failure first and foremost, but it's definitely grown into I believe a viable platform and a viable example on how organizations can better leverage their own content. The WWE isn't still, their flagship shows on USA every Monday. They also have SmackDown Live on Tuesdays, which is where a lot of their ad revenue comes through. But they have more than 1 million subscribers on the WWE Network, which at $10 a pop, I think it would be a great revenue generator. So it'll be interesting to see if the UFC Fight Pass can grow in that way. Can they continue to move in the right direction? Right now, they aren't creating a lot of original content. They don't have, and I will say that WWE Network's content is not that engrossing, except for I watch the in ring shows, but I don't watch the original documentary type content that they do. It just doesn't interest me. I'm not even sure how we really kind of segue into this, but that's neither here nor there. So looking at what is available on Fight Pass, I'm not the biggest fan. I definitely don't watch Looking for a Fight. I'm not a fan of The Ultimate Fighter. And they aren't doing as many shows. They have, like I said, they have the grappling events. They have Invicta on there. They have Glory, but they don't put the main events on Glory, which is something I've noticed recently as well. So I see why people are a little turned off by what is offered within that platform. But that, like, again, that's just it'll be interesting to see what business decisions are made about Fight Pass. I think it is something that they will not get rid of, but it's something that I think could be better leveraged for the long-term gains of this organization, especially as television packages kind of change. This is where we are in a point where we are seeing a change to how people watch TV, how people consume media. A lot of it is on an on-demand type of is an on-demand type of platform where people want to consume what they want instead of consuming when they're consume what they want when they want to instead of consuming when they're told based on being handcuffed to a schedule. But as I said, I'm not even sure how I really even got into this. I should have been talking about UFC 107, Fight Night 107, the whole time. So let's get back into that, where we saw a main event with Jimmy Manoa basically starched Corey Anderson in the first round of their fight, and this was a pretty interesting fight. I think Schwan and I talked about this last week, and he thought Corey Anderson's wrestling was going to be able to be enough to win this fight here. And even though Anderson's been rocked in the past and he's been shaken up, it still looked as if he would be able to do enough wrestling wise to get this win. A lot of people had him as a favorite coming in, but all it took was one of those hooks from Jimmy to finish the fight, and we've seen his power before. And hearing fight, it was definitely interesting to see that Manoa has, I think he's 16-2 overall, and his 2 losses have come to Anthony Johnson and Daniel Cormier. So the question now becomes where he fits within the 205 division, because if he is going to be someone who becomes, I wrote about him being a breath of fresh air within the 205-pound division, because there really aren't any contenders anymore. We've been recycling. A lot of people were kind of on hold as we wait for so the question is, what do you really do with this decision? Do you if you're Manoa, do you wait like for like I'm sorry, I just got distracted by something, but if you're Manoa, do you call out John Jones? That was a question that kind of came up afterwards, after the fight, when the idea of him fighting Manuel, or the idea of Manuel kind of fighting Jones in the future was kind of scoffed at, just because Manuel said some comments about not wanting to fight guys who have failed drug tests, and regardless of the story behind Jones's failed drug test, that was still an opportunity where he could have been the man to welcome John Jones back to the cage at some point in time this year. And I think that still would have been a good matchup. Excuse me one second, guys. So the question now becomes, where do you go with Manoa from here? I think he's currently ranked. Let me see. And again, as we always say, we know that the UFC rankings don't really mean a whole lot here, but they do help capture some of the conversation. So Manoa is currently ranked in the, let's see, he's currently sitting, he's number 4 right now in the light heavyweight division, and that is through Wednesday of last week, the 15th. And ahead of him are Cormier, Johnson, Gustafsson, and Teixeira. So where do you go from here? I would like to see him slide with either Glover Teixeira or Mauricio Hua. Hua, who's also coming off of a win over Gian Vellante from a few weeks back. So you have to wonder if that's the right direction to go with him. Hey, how you doing there, Schwan? How you doing tonight?
Oh, good. How about yourself?
Doing good, man. Doing well. Thanks for being able to join us today. We just got talking about UFC Fight Night 107, and we're talking about Jimmy Manuwa, the man of the evening from Saturday night when he got that knockout win over Corey Anderson. What did you think of that fight?
Um, I mean, there wasn't much to it as far as like it make finish. It kind of created more questions for me regarding Anderson than it did anything. I mean, he was the guy. He was the guy who was the young guy who was the prospect who was supposed to have the opportunity to move up, and that kind of loss puts him in the line, and it kind of was a fringe. I don't think that's what the young guy kind of create some new matchups to come in, and that got all wiped away with that left hook, that left hand he landed.
So, and everything, like you said, all of it got wiped away. Anderson's kind of momentum was stopped there. But a is this a great thing for Jimmy Manuwa? Because the question now became, I wrote about this week, is whether or not he is a breath of fresh air for the light heavyweight division, because right now we've been recycling contenders as we wait for John Jones to return. But Manuel made the mistake of not being the man to say, "Hey, I want to welcome Jones back when he comes off a suspension," because I think that would have been a great fight to make. Unfortunately, he kind of scoffed at the idea, taking a shot at Jones, saying he doesn't want to fight guys who have failed drug tests, which that's a limiting qualifier right there to begin with. But when you look at who's around him at 205 pounds, where do you go next with Jimmy?
I don't really know because I mean he's lost to the big names in the division already. So this matchup that makes the most sense would probably be to have him go in against Jones on his return back. I don't think he would turn down the fight, and I think him making that comment about the steroid comment would be something to build on as far as like creating a rival.
Yeah.
It's really hard to tell. It's really hard to tell what to do with them because a whole lot. We saw some improvement as far as like maybe how he pressures guys. We saw some improvement maybe as far as his wrestling, but we didn't see enough of it to really know how improved he is. We know like initially in the first round, early on when you're still warm and you haven't been in any grappling exchange, you haven't really had to move a lot. When you got your first win and all your explosiveness and all your energy, we saw that he's effective. We don't know how that fight would have gone if it could have gone a couple seconds longer. So it's really hard to tell how much technical improvement he could really do again. If he could have against the more elite guys, he's our division. We still don't know that.
And when you're definitely right on that. That he basically went in there and dispatched a guy pretty quickly without any answering any questions really about how he's grown. When I look at this division, I mean, the only names that really kind of stand out to me are Glover Teixeira, and Mauricio Hua. You know, you do have Misha Chikronov coming back to the organization as well too. So out of those three names, which one kind of stands out to you the most and who you will want to see Manuel fight next? Because he's calling out the champion, but you got to be realistic. This guy's he's lost to both Anthony Johnson and Alexander Gustafsson. And you would kind of have to take Cormier as a favorite if that fight was made as well too. So where do you really go with Manuel now? You know, there's some names out there that could create some true title eliminators for him if he was able to get the win.
Yeah, I mean, he establishes a legitimate contender. He'd probably have Glover would be a good mix, but Glover I think is already Gustafsson. Gustafsson would be a good win for him. Beating Johnson would be a good win for him, but as it stands right now, none of those guys have a reason to fight him. Gustafsson dominated him, so did Johnson. He has no reason. Glover would be a good fight, but Glover's taken, so that leaves him with somebody like Shogun, who's still a name, but I don't know but I don't know that beating establishes you as a contender. Now Shogun beating Manawa, that might put him in as a contender where he'd be a fight. How uneven that Shogun's looked in the past few years, and the guys he's beaten haven't been particularly dominant fight. It doesn't make you a.
And you're cutting in and out, man. You're cutting in and out.
I said beating Hua doesn't make you a title challenger. He hasn't beaten. He's won 3 fights in a row, but who has he beat? It's been nobody elite. It's mid-tier. It's been kind of those lower end light heavyweight guys he's been beating. I don't think he really. I think if Shogun beats Manawa, he becomes a title challenger. Still got to beat at least one of a potential title challenger, in my opinion.
So, would you take Manawa in a fight over Shogun? Do you think that that's kind of a dead giveaway, seeing how Shogun's competed in recent months and year?
Shogun's counterpunching has been really good. It's been magnificent. But the thing about it is he still lost a step physically. And now that he's a step slower, he's a little bit easier to hit than he was before. And Manawa's still got that explosiveness. He's got that length, and he sets up his strikes pretty well. He doesn't really throw combinations. He kind of pot shots, throws solo shots, really powerful solo shots on people. So there's a good chance that if he touches Shogun, that's it for him. You know, Shogun's every time he's faced a big hitter, he's up, if not stopped. So if he gets him early, I think most likely he would knock Shogun out. But if the Shogun could kind of stretch the fight into the second and third rounds, I think there's a chance he could win. He's a good enough counterpuncher. It's just a matter of when he gets hit, can he take the shot? And being at this stage of his career, I don't know that he can take the kind of shot that Jimmy fires. I mean, Jimmy hit Vellante, and Vellante could have stopped Shogun if he would have put some shots together and not been so one-dimensional how he was approaching the fight.
That's some good breakdown there. That's some good breakdown. I think it'll be interesting to see what they do with Manawa next, because that 205 used to be the division where the stars were, and now it's kind of the group where stars go to die. There really aren't any big names there anymore. There isn't anyone who draws a lot of attraction, and a lot of the guys are kind of fading away, for lack of a better term. You know, obviously you got Chael and Chael and Wanderlei about the fight over in Bellator, but it's like, really, where are the big fights when you look at the 205-pound division? Where are the big fights at this point? And I'm not sure if there really are too many more to offer.
There's really not, at this point, the division, the UFC's division is so thin. Even Bellator's division is it's gotten better, but it's still fairly thin. They have the same problem. There's just not enough. There's not enough people in there where you can bring a guy up. You know, it's like you have a guy fight these, either you're fighting
You there?
slow progression anymore, which is part of the reason why in the UFC you don't have many legitimate light heavyweight contenders, because all the young guys, they get thrown in with these seasoned veterans who may not be in their prime but are close enough to it that their experience makes up for the lack of physical ability. So you have these rookies or these prospects who have glaring holes, and you have these seasoned veterans who know how to take, and they keep, every time you get a rookie who starts moving his way up and gets to the point where he might break through, he faces some veteran who knows all the tricks of the game, knows all the setups, is going to be calm under pressure, and essentially beats them and sends them right back down the line. It happened to Corey Anderson on Saturday. It happened to Jared Cannonier when he fought Glover Teixeira. You know, it routinely happens. Every time somebody starts getting them, they end up getting thrown to the wolves, having to face a top 5 guy who's been in the sport for 10 to 15 years and fought everybody and fought every style. And then they take full advantage of the holes that prospect has, and that prospect's got to start all over again. It's like, if you notice, all the guys in the elite level are all older guys. They're all fighting for years and years and years, and none of the prospects are seasoned enough or skilled enough or well-rounded enough to get past them. Every time they move at that level, they get thoroughly exposed, and it's happened repeatedly throughout the history of the light heavyweight division so far. Cormier is an old. He's not a young guy. He's fairly old. Johnson's not old per se, but he's been fighting for a long time, you know. So that's the veteran. So it's hard to really set up any matches to have established who's a legitimate contender, because we just don't have enough guys to slowly move guys up and down the division and kind of see what they have to offer. And the few guys they did have, they let those go to other organizations or other divisions.
So let me ask you this as we continue to kind of go down this rabbit hole. When you look at the 205-pound weight class, who is a young prospect that that we should be keeping our eyes on? Obviously, we have Chikranov, who the UFC finally brought back. But if you want to stick to him, you can stick to him, or other than him, who is someone that fans should be excited to watch, or someone that they think you think can bubble up to the top?
Out of him, I mean, there's not too many. There's not too many light heavyweights, young ones that I think, okay, this guy has what it takes to go for a run. I mean, the only guy I thought who had a legitimate skill set would have been in Bellator, McGarry's not even young either, but he's the closest thing. He'd be the closest thing to a guy who hasn't been fighting for years and years and years, who's somewhat young and not known to the masses as well. Outside of him, and I don't know who else there is. I mean, it's really so thin. There's a lot of middleweights who should probably be fighting a light heavyweight to spice up the division, but I really don't know of any light heavyweights that I've seen in or out of the UFC or even in Bellator where I'd say, okay, that's a young guy who is considered a legitimate prospect, and I have ideas that he's going to be the next title challenger or the next big star. People we already know, the people who are pretty much obvious locks to be contenders for a title or contenders to be elite. It's just a really weird division. It doesn't have very much that. It has the best fighter of all time in it. Has one of the best light heavyweights of all time, and Daniel Cormier and John. And everybody else it's so hard to develop fight. Like, you see the same. We're gonna have a Johnson Cormier rematch. Jones is beating everybody in the top 5, top 6, top 7, and a lot of the guys in the top 10 have already fought a lot of the lower level guys. These matchups push the division any further ahead. It's like just fights for the sake of having them. Fights aren't good enough matchups where they justify the guys being considered elite. Let's say Manuel beats Shogun. Would that justify him getting a shot at Cormier? Especially given the fact that Johnson blew him, if Hua upsets Manawa, do you really think he has a chance against Cormier or Johnson or Jones?
Didn't they already fight? Didn't Shogun already fight Cormier?
No, he fought John Jones. I don't think he didn't fight
Or
Cormier.
am I thinking about Dan Henderson? Maybe I'm Henderson in that fight.
But all those guys, even if they win 3 or 4 in a row, you don't have any faith in their ability to beat the top 3, 4, 5 guys in their division. They're not good enough to do that. What are they really fighting for?
That's very
You're
true.
not you don't have good enough opposition to justify a title shot. Basically, it'd be like it is in flyweight with a Johnson, where you're just getting fights because they need to have a title fight, so they're just going to put someone in there, even though they haven't performed well enough to earn one, or they're clearly so deteriorated that they don't have any shot at beating Jones, Johnson, or Cormier.
Okay, that's some good breakdown there. That's some good breakdown. I think we're going to see some interest. As you get higher, in my opinion, as you get higher up the weight class ladder, I think that there's a struggle in finding continued quality fights, and we see that right now in heavyweight and in light heavyweight, when it just doesn't seem like someone's jumping off the page. Hey, I'm the number one contender. The same way that guys like Conor McGregor did. But that's another conversation. Same way guys like Jessica Andrade did with her drop down to straw weight. Same way that people such as Carolina Kowalskiewicz did, moving up and kind of cutting her way through the division, or Valentina Shevchenko. We don't see that. We don't see a lot of guys still bubbling up to the top who are very talented. Instead, it's a lot of older fighters staying around. And I think that this kind of puts the organization, not the organization, excuse me, puts those two divisions in a questionable position as we see right now.
Yep, you just can't develop guys who get past the veterans, and most of the veterans have already lost to the top 3 guys already. Glover, even if he goes on a win streak, he's lost to Jones and he's lost to John. OSPs, would have been considered one of the better veterans, but the Glover, and I'd have no faith that he could beat Cormier or Johnson. Hua's already lost. He's already lost to John. He's already lost to Jones. It's like you already had guys who've already lost to the best and lost in a manner that's not even competitive. So even if they come back and they get to fight again, nobody has it. You can't sell that fight. Sell it. We're gonna have Hua fight Jones. Didn't when Hua actually was in shape and younger and more explosive, more athletic, he couldn't touch Jones. Jones actually improved. Hua's deteriorated, and you want us to pay money to see that fight happening. It's just a tough.
Yeah, you couldn't pay me to watch that fight.
Yeah, I mean, it's
not right now.
It's essentially torture. I mean, what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm. You couldn't pay me to watch that fight, but someone you could pay me to watch is Gunnar Nelson, and whether or not what's next for him. He got the submission win over Alan Jouban on Saturday, and it seems like he and his coach are looking at Stephen Thompson as the next target. Tell me, what did you think about Nelson's performance on Saturday, and if you would be interested in him fighting Stephen Thompson?
Well, I've been a Nelson fan. I mean, he's the Christ. I've always been a fan. A lot of people don't give them their respect, but the right circumstances, you can easily apply them to any full contact. Nelson put on a good performance. The thing with Nelson is Nelson's essentially the same fighter he was when he first got in here. His ground game's always been good. What hasn't been good is his wrestling, whether it's defensive, counter, or offensive wrestling. And he's really actually developed those layers in his game where he's a legitimate takedown threat. If somebody take him down, instead of just giving up the takedown, he can sprawl out, he can counter, he can turn them over, he can outposition them and work from the top instead of being from there and having to submit somebody from the bottom, which even if you're not facing a top end fighter in mixed martial arts, it's very hard to do when you're facing a guy with a legitimate wrestling background or decent. The problem I have with Gunnar Nelson is a lot of his success is based off his athleticism. He's got a natural sense of distance. He's got good foot speed. He's got really good hand speed. He's got good explosiveness, good power. He hasn't developed his striking game all the way around. A lot of his striking game, and I'm not the only person who's seen this. A friend of the show, Patrick Wyman and Connor Rebush, have often made this comment. We've had discussions about this. Gunnar Nelson's whole line of defense, it's not legitimate. He doesn't, I mentioned this on the show last week, he doesn't do slips and parries and blocks. He doesn't roll with punches and come back. punches and work the body in combinations all the way to the head. His whole line of defense is distance. He's essentially a master at closing and extending distance. And what he does is before your shots can get in, so he can get off his offense, or he extends the distance so you can't land shots. You've either got to chase him over. Is gonna, when you over pursue, you throw too many strikes, you get too aggressive, and get the takedown, or you run into big shots. Usually his straight right, front kick, to choose to throw. You basically run into it, and that's if you walk behind and pressure him slowly. Boxing range, he doesn't have boxing defense. He doesn't really even have boxing offense. In the pocket, in that mid-range distance, he doesn't really move his head. He doesn't twist and turn his body. He doesn't do a lot of shoot with the strikes. It's all, I land my shot, get in, land my shots, get out. Get in, land my shots, get out. You over pursue, I get in, do a trip takedown, duck under, get a single. That doesn't work, go to a double, get you down. And that's a big hole in his game. And it's been exploited before. It's good, it's dominant. He's low. Notice the guys he's beaten haven't had the finer aspects of striking down. They're beating Brandon Thatch. Brandon Thatch is a very good striker as far as athleticism and power, but he doesn't have any setup. It's all big strikes, knees, elbows, big punches. He doesn't work his way in. He doesn't roll with punches. He doesn't set it. Very obvious. It's easy to counter. It's easy to. Tumanov actually has a busy style of striking, and he does have a lot of skills on the feet, but he's such a liability on the ground. He can't effectively pressure anybody because he's so weak on the ground. If you're constantly pressuring, at some point you're gonna give up an angle, give up the center line, and somebody's gonna be able to take overextend, and somebody's gonna take you down, or you're gonna run into a shot that's gonna hurt you, and you're gonna get taken down. But once again, now he fought Joe Blayne, who has a lot of skills. He has a lot of range of strikes, but Joe Blayne's not a guy who's the top end athlete. He's a very good one, and his mid-range game isn't exactly dynamic in itself. People who weren't able to exploit the holes in his game, they weren't able to exploit it to the point of winning. But in each and every one of those fights, those guys had some success in those areas to win the fight. So if you look at the trajectory of his career, the same holes he had when he first got in here, as far as defense, his stances, where it makes him vulnerable to kicks and his body vulnerable to kicks, his inability to be offensive at a boxing range or be defensively sound or counter at a boxing range, he's improved his ability to and control you from the ground or defend your downs, but his actual stand-up skills have actually kind of plateaued, and he's only getting by because he's an athlete. And then he's more aggressive than Thompson. He's a bigger one-shot hitter than Thompson, but he's not a better boxer than Thompson. So Thompson has a clear line to victory if he fights him. He knows he can beat him in that boxing range. And Gunnar Nelson has said himself he's looking to finish now, which means Thompson's not going to have to initiate offense. Thompson is best when you're initiating and you give him the opportunity to counter.
Okay. So I like how you looked at Nelson's wrestling ability and what he's been able to do on the ground versus where he's really grown on his feet. And I think that Thompson is a difficult fight for him to jump right into at this point in time. I think he's definitely a very different class of fighter from what we've seen in Johnny Hendricks recently. So it'll be interesting to see if Nelson could do what he is what people would expect him to want to do, go in there, try to get the takedown and get the finish from there. Remember, he's not like Damian Maia has perfected that tactic in such a way that fighters just can't even, I mean, hell, Nelson couldn't do anything about it when they fought. So it'd be interesting to see if he can employ that same type of style against Thompson when other fighters have failed in that same area.
Well, the whole thing about it is Thompson's good with the wrestling. He can handle the wrestling. He can handle sprawls, whizzers, and spinning out and controlling distance. The biggest Nelson is going to be that, unlike other guys who aren't familiar with the range, because if you train with traditional martial arts, karate type people, or you spar them, there's a different range they work at. There's a different rhythm. There's a different even though there's only so many angles and aspects of footwear you can use, they focus on particular things. And if you're not used to it, if you don't train it, you haven't trained with it or over the period of your life, there's a lot of openings and feints and techniques you're not going to recognize. You're just going to depend on your ability to fire off volume to overwhelm using entries and exits you're not familiar with. The thing is, Thompson's familiar with those things. He's not going to fool Thompson. Thompson's not going to fool him either. So both people are going to have issues of getting off. It's going to be a matter of who's got the more complete game. And as far as the striking, you have to say that Thompson do it. One-dimensional when it comes to the shape of Thompson's, but I don't have any. He's going to consistently and effectively get Thompson down. You know, the only person years ago, but other than that, it's been Tyron Woodley, and I don't know that Nelson's that kind of athlete. I definitely know he's not that kind of wrestler. So then it becomes a stand. Stephen Thompson's overall striking is more comprehensive than Gunnar Nelson's. In kickbox at range, he knows how to work a jab. He can put punches together. In the parry counters that you have from karate, he can put actual legitimate combinations. He can put an uppercut hook. He can fake a jab. He can hook off the jab. He can do different things that Nelson can't. There's a difference.
So there?
Yes. Hello?
Yeah, there you go. You were cutting it out. I didn't know if you were still there or not.
Oh. The big difference between them is Nelson is probably the better athlete. He's got the bigger power. But I think Thompson is the overall better striker. And you'd have to convince me that Nelson can consistently take him down left and right. I don't think he can. So I would have to probably favor Thompson in that fight because I think he's a more comprehensive striker. And I think he works better off the counter. And I know Nelson's going to come trying to look for a finish. And that means Thompson's going to have multiple opportunities to finish him in return.
What's Nelson's ceiling? Do you think he's someone that we can see develop into a contender? I don't think so. I think he is a great grappler, fantastic guy on the mat. But I don't know if he has the tools to fully develop into someone who is a dual threat type of fighter.
He's got the physical tools. He's athletic enough. He's dynamic, quick enough. He's got good body control. He's got the heart for fighting, the mentality. But the limits in his game, the shallowness of his stand-up game, it presents too many a lane to victory. I mean, if you can steadily apply pressure on him and you can handle him at range, at least be competent at range and get it into that boxing range, that mid-range, you're going to overwhelm him every time because he doesn't have any legitimate technical answers. His only answer is to get in, to beat you by getting into range really quick where you can't get him or getting out. But that's hard to do over a series of 3 rounds straight. It's hard to do over 5 rounds straight when you're facing a person who can apply pressure and somebody who can actually make you pay in that range, who's good enough to make you pay in that range. That's the only thing that's going to stop him going. He's got a good enough grappling game. His grappling game is probably only second to Maya's. His wrestling game is consistently improving, but his stand-up game, he has the same he had when he first started in here. The legs open for the leg kicks. His stance is very long, and he doesn't put combinations together. It's a lot of 1-2, one shots, 1s and 2s. He doesn't throw a lot of 3, 4s, and 5s. He doesn't mix up his shots. And defensively, he's not very sound at the boxing range. So if you can start chopping his legs and pressure him, and everybody's gotten to his legs at least a couple times, whether they've won or lost again, kind of cut the cage off and pressure, his defense is non-existent. If you can keep him in front of the cage and keep him out of the open cage, you can counter him easily. You can break inside, and you can just chop him up with legs and knees to the body. It's been done before. And it can be done again because he still hasn't addressed those problems. He's still, as far as the strike was when he first got in there. And when he's a way superior athlete, or he's facing a guy who's fundamentally flawed, yeah, he'll have huge advantages. Fundamentally flawed, who are tough enough to walk through that, pressuring him and keep pressuring him. And when his footwork starts breaking down underneath that pressure, and they get their hands on him and can start working that middle ground, it's going to be a wrap. Even though he's got the athleticism and the ground skills to be a world champion, striking awareness isn't there, and neither is his striking technique. not past a certain point. If you're not all the way in or all the way out, he's not effective. And he's not really effective in the clinch either. Not really in a real sense where he could break someone down and beat them up. And he's not really super effective in mid range either. He's a long range guy who explodes in long and explodes out to the range. If he's not controlling distance, he can't do anything to you. He hasn't proven it.
Interesting, man. That's some see, and I like talking about guys who are kind of aren't in the main event. They're guys who have some cachet, have some value, who aren't really at that point yet where they're challenging for titles. They're still trying to make their own way. And I think Gunnar Nelson is one of those guys. I remember I was very excited when he signed with the UFC a few years back because I thought he's someone to watch. And I think he's gone the right route of a prospect. You win a couple, you may lose one. You win a couple, you may lose one. So he's growing in the right direction. I think he's going to be around for a little time.
Yeah,
or a little while.
He'll be ranked. He should be really ranked, but he's got enough athletic talent. He's got enough talent on the ground. And even with his stand-up, it hasn't been developed enough, but he's good enough champion. He's good enough if he does the works and addresses those issues to be the very best. But he hasn't addressed them, and that's my main concern. Even though he's on this win streak, he's been winning essentially the same way he's always won, either with a combination of people not being familiar with his striking, his stand-up, and a combination of his grappling. He hasn't shown improvements in the key guys who are of a pack. When he faced Rick, in and out, putting him in trouble, landing shots, countering, getting away from his strikes. But as the rounds continued and Rick's story was able to continue to apply pressure and get to his legs, the same things he could do in a short 3-round fight. When it went 5 rounds, his body couldn't take the punishment. His body couldn't take the pressure. Even when he fought Damian Maia, even though he engaged him on the ground, Maia's footwork allowed him to pressure him and get the entries he wanted and force him in a grappling exchange. He was at no point was effectively cutting off the cage and consistently pressuring him. He couldn't get in all the way. He couldn't get out all the way. Maia was. And even when he was losing his exchange, when he got back to his feet, he had no choice. He had to grapple. He was Maia because he hadn't developed that aspect of his footwork or his offense. Once you get in on him, he's really got nothing for you. And if you're a superior grappler or you're a competent enough wrestler where you can stay on your feet, enough grappler, only thing he's got range is grapple with you, and you can have enough to out grapple him. Good enough wrestlers will control him and they can make him pay in those clinches or on the inside.
Okay, all right there. So we've had a pretty good interesting conversation about Nelson. Let's talk about Brad Pickett. Brad Pickett snatched defeat from the jaws of victory. He was doing great. He had one. I thought he was up 2 rounds, and then he gets himself head kicked and finished on the ground. Did you have any problem with the stoppage, Schwan?
Yes.
Did you have any problem with Brad Pickett's fight, or excuse me, the way? Did you have any problem with the stoppage in the Brad Pickett fight?
I don't have a problem with the stoppage. How much abuse he's taken, how many times he's been at this point, and knowing it's his last fight, there's no need to subject him to anything not clean. The funny thing is, he said he wanted to leave it all out there because he felt like when he Faber, he kind of played it safe and he was fighting not to lose. So had he fought not to lose, there's a better than average chance he would have won it. Most people, he had a 2-0 lead, and all he basically had to do was sit on it, get a takedown, lay and pray, or just exchanges, because he's a good enough defend. He can reverse position and stay out of any danger long enough to win the decision. But he went out there trying to go on a highlight and trying to finish the fight. He wanted to finish it. He wanted to go, came in, and unfortunately, way that it's often cost him in his biggest opponents he's faced. Vera, the guy he fought, isn't an established name, but he's a young talent. He's a physical specimen, and he's got a great array of skills. He just doesn't have very, very much experience. And when Pickett gave him an opportunity to turn the fight around, he quickly and decisively turned it around. I think they were right to stop it. I think they gave him a fair shot to come back, and he wasn't able to. And he had a good career. Who was always able to compete with the best. He was just never one of the very. So I don't think he has anything to be ashamed of, and I don't think there should be any complaints from him or his fans, in my opinion.
And yeah, I was actually thinking about Brad Pickett as he kind of walked out of the cage for the last time, because other than that win over Demetrius Johnson, what really is his biggest win in his career? I can't really, like, he had big fights, but did he ever have that big victory that pushed him over the top and into like a higher place of value within a promotion? And this is a guy who fought Ian McCall. He fought some of the biggest names even before stepping into. He fought Renan Barão even before stepping into WEC. WEC is really kind of where he gained his notoriety.
He fought Thomas Almeida.
And he fought so many good guys, so many good quality fights, and he just never could really get that big win other than the Demetrius Johnson win. So really, what do you say about this guy at this point in time?
He was an action fighter. He always gave the fans their money's worth. I don't ever recall Brad Pickett being in a boring fight. Like, I know they always say boring fight. They're always an exciting fight. Brad Pickett was literally a guy who was always in exciting fights. Win or lose show for the fans. He always left everything he had in there, and he was a guy who actually showed improvement. He was never the greatest striker, even though he had that one punch name. But he tightened up his striking. His wrestling had always improved. Being a European fighter, he had some of the better wrestling and better transitional grappling than most people from Europe. Most fighters from Europe. Usually that's a big hole in their game. It wasn't a hole in his game. He faced the best guys, and even though he never really beat them, he was always able to compete with them. He never looked the cage with them. He always had enough moments where you thought that had a couple things gone wrong, maybe he'd been a little bit more talented, he could have won that fight. He could have won those fights. So he's a good action fighter. He's a guy who gave it his best to the UFC and to MMA as a whole, but he wasn't great. He wasn't, I hate to say this, as a fighter with a fighter's heart, he was special and he was great. But as far as the results he got and being elite in skills and physical talent, he was just not an elite fighter. He was just never a great one. He was just a guy who was great for the fans and great for a promotion because he fight and he always put up a great fight against whoever they asked him to fight.
Definitely true. I think it was a very touching moment to see his opponent kind of talk so highly about him. It was a very moving moment. One of those moments that are great in sports. One of the moments we haven't seen in MMA for a little while. Yeah, we had the great Uriah Faber last fight, but other than that, we really haven't seen that moment in a little while in mixed martial arts. So it was good to kind of get that special sports moment this past Saturday. Let's talk about Joe Duffy now. Duffy walked away from his contract with the UFC. He fought his contract out, and I think he won 2 of his last 3. Other than a Dustin Poirier bout, I think he went 4-1 in his time within the UFC. And so now here we are, looking at a guy who could easily be within the top 10 of the lightweight division, and he's a free agent. If you were in Joe Duffy's shoes right now, what would you do?
I might actually explore the Bellator option. He's in the UFC. He has the potential, and I get why he'd win. But the Bellator is really trying to make an impression in his home country, and Bellator would love to have a face for a division, a guy there, and a guy they could really push. And he's already familiar to the MMA. He's still got the Conor McGregor storyline. They can milk that. He's a guy coming off of a series of wins in the UFC. They can use to push him, and they can use him as a star when they're trying to establish their brand outside of the country. I don't know what the UFC's plans are for him, to be quite honest. And being that he's probably got at least another 3 or 4 minimum fights before he'd even be considered for any sort of. So it's a matter of wait, and I don't know what they're paying him in that meantime. Are financially in that meantime. So I know Bellator would pay money to have a guy of his caliber, with his caliber of skills, to have a guy who they could use as the face of a division for that country that they're trying to get into. It's a slam dunk. Scott Coker loves these type of situations, and he loves these type of fighters, especially as MMA has been proven to be a big worldwide sport. So I explore it. If the UFC made me an offer I couldn't, then yeah, I'd stay. But the UFC's not. They don't do that anymore. The business they're in. I mean, they might do that for a top 5 guy or a really popular guy. Joe Duffy is neither a top 5 guy nor a popular guy. So if it's going to come down to money or any issue of respect, like they should respect what I can do and respect the potential I have, he's not getting it from the UFC. There's guys who have just as much potential, if not more, and where are they at?
Good thoughts there on that. I think so. This kind of is going to kind of segue into a conversation that we're going to talk about later. But I definitely agree. I think that Bellator would be a good option for him. There are interesting fights there. I would love to watch him fight Michael Chandler, to see him in there going there, and maybe even get a fight against Benson Henderson, to fight Josh Thompson. Like there are some good fights there for him.
Yeah, he could move up.
I
mean,
and he could also move up as well.
Featherweight, so there's lots of good fights at featherweight. There's good fights at lightweight if he wants to dance between them, and Bellator will let him do that.
Yeah, there are definitely good fights there for him to make. And as far as the money aspect of it, you can never really be totally certain what these Viacom deals look like. Yes, we know that some fighters are jumping at the bit at taking them. We just see this week, as I mentioned, Dylan Dennis signed to Bellator last week. This week we had Lorenz Larkin and Ryan Bader. So good deals to good fighters, and I wouldn't be surprised if Duffy took the leap as well.
Yeah, I mean, like to find the UFC, but the fact of the matter is, the UFC at corners, and they're not going to be extending themselves for guys who don't have a obvious value. And is skilled as he is, I don't know value what real what you can really sell, move pay-per-views around. He's a card filler guy right now, a very good one. He doesn't put butts in seats, not in America, not with ratings. He goes out their way to bring him in, regardless of the skills he showed, and regardless of because they've had guys they accomplished just as much or more in their divisions, and they've let those guys go. So I have to believe that Duffy wouldn't be far off from being let go himself.
Yes, that's definitely some pretty good breakdown. And that's going to allow us to segue right into our next conversation topic. As I mentioned, we have some guys such as Lorenz Larkin and others who have made the jump to Bellator. It was announced this week. What are some of your thoughts on that? Do you think that these are the right moves for these guys, or what?
Well, I mean, when you listen to some of the interviews, you read about them, you do some research into them, and you see how the UFC kind of handled them, it makes you wonder, like, what else would they have done? Like Lorenz Larkin said, he didn't even really get an offer until less than a month ago, like 2 weeks ago. The last fight, like how long ago? Like, what was it, 6 months ago, 7 months ago? More? And they just now gave him an offer in the past 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks. That's ridiculous for a guy who's a free agent, who's on a winning streak, who has an exciting style, who beat one of the guys, the top contenders in division. Jorge, how do you let that guy, not just let that guy go, but not even make an offer 2 weeks in the do that, unless you just feel like you have such an advantage based off the cachet of your organization in the select. I mean, they didn't really do much. And the same thing with Benson Henderson. They didn't treat Benson Henderson was on a winning streak as a welterweight. He used to be a former lightweight champion. He'd accomplished a lot. He had been he wasn't a huge established fighter, and yet they didn't really go out of their way to keep him either. Not really.
My favorite thing about the Benson Henderson situation is when Dana White got on. I mean, you can never be too surprised with some of the things Dana White says. I always got to preface that. But his explanation for the reason being why he let Benson Henderson walk is because that the UFC wasn't interested in signing a fighter who was going in the wrong direction in the rankings. And what he meant was he wasn't interested in re-signing a fighter who was going down in the rankings. So when you looked at that, you got to be like, wait, Benson Henderson went from being ranked like number 2 in the lightweight division, number 2, 3, to being ranked number like 11 and then number 8 in the welterweight division. So yes, his number was going down, but it was because he was in a new weight class where his rank was rising. And it's like, to hear him say that, it was like, you really must think people are idiots.
Well, I mean, the fact of the matter is, unfortunately, it's surprising how many people just buy into whatever the UFC says. They say this guy's not a good fighter. He's not. They say this guy's a bum. He's a bum. You know, Fedor's career was clearly established. You know, it was in the UFC. It was clearly established. But the people who only watch UFC think Fedor's a coward and a bum. They think Brock Lesnar is one of the best heavyweights of all time. Neither things is true. But when you have those 3 letters backing what you're saying, all sorts of craziness. And
Yes, that's all sorts of craziness.
you know, and I know the UFC just isn't. They're not necessarily bad for them. They're trying to take care of what they got to take care of. But the fact of the matter is, got to do the same. And some of these fighters were giving up large amounts of money. Some of these fighters were not getting sponsorship opportunities. Some of these fighters knew for a fact that they weren't going to be made priorities in the divisions they're in. So what's the point of fighting just to fight? If you want to title, or you want to contend to be in the top 10, and you know that they don't believe in you, or you've lost too many big fights, what's the point of being in the UFC? Even if you're fighting the best, you're nowhere near a title fight, which means you're nowhere near good money, which means you're nowhere near headline opportunities, which is what everybody wants. So if you're not moving forward, then essentially you're just standing still, which means you're not accomplishing anything. So what's the purpose of staying in there? They're not paying you the way you want. You're not getting the opportunities you want. You're not getting the money you want. Why would you stay there? It's like they make it pretty easy for you to leave if they don't really want you to stay. And guys like Ryan, options that he have really. He had already lost to almost every big name, decisively so, in light heavyweight. How many fights does he have to win before he can get a legitimate shot? Who does he have to beat? Have too many options. Larkin was interesting because he was moving up the rankings. He came off a really dynamic, impressive win. So you're kind of, you would think that he would have some leverage, but then you hear about how they treated him, and it tells you all you need to know. The UFC highlighting and going out of their way for specific. If you're not one of those fighters, then you have to take. Want to take it, then they're just going to let you go. You're free to examine whatever opportunity.
So what? So let's look back at Larkin and Bader. Yes, I agree. I think that these signings were the right direction for both of the men. But what do you see as next for both of these guys? Do you take Bader and do you throw him right in there with Phil Davis and say, you've already defeated the champion once, do it again? Do you take Larkin and do you put him in a fight with Douglas Lima or Koreshkov, someone right at the top, with the hopes of him breaking through to get because I think he's definitely a title contender already, in my opinion, with the last couple of performances he's put out there. So do you throw these guys into the heap already, or do you kind of take a gamble on them the same way you did with Josh Thompson and slip up?
It was different with Thompson. Thompson was clear. I mean, he's older. He's on a clear decline. I mean, he's been fighting for a long time. And not just that, how many injuries has he had to recover? It built himself back up. How many fights did he cancel because of injuries? And think about the last couple, they were fairly punishing events. Just easy fights or just technical fights. His fight with Tony Ferguson was a very high intensity, high pace, punishing fight. So Thompson was already on the decline. Lorenz Larkin is still on his way up. He just moved down to the weight. He's coming off some big wins. He's on a move. You could have him fight some lesser named guy, maybe not just like some bottom of the barrel guy, but you could have him fight a non-elite guy and see what happens. I mean, you could put him in with MVP. That'd be an interesting fight.
True. That would be great. That would be a very interesting fight.
I mean, MVP would have somebody who's willing to strike with him, and then you'd find out for sure if MVP's for real, and we already know Lorenz Larkin's for real, but we'd have a chance, even if he loses, we could see how good is MVP. He says he is, because now you're facing a guy who's good enough to strike with. physical and not just the technical skills, but the physical skills to strike with you. So we're gonna find out in what you're about as a fighter.
Yeah, that would definitely be a fight against someone who we know isn't going to back down, someone who isn't going to kind of wilt at the pressure that MVP brings in the cage. What about Bader? What do you do with him? Do you throw him in there with Liam? Or do you give him Phil out the gate?
I'm kind of weird about Bader because I'm like Bader has always lost. So if you have him go, he's talking about fighting Phil Davis. He beats Phil Davis, great. He's a champion, and a whole new storyline wins. So there's a good part of that. But if he goes in and loses to the champion, he's right back where he started, where he's in the UFC, all the way at the back of the line, trying to figure out how to get himself back in a position to contend for a title.
Let me ask you this though: is that totally the case though? Because he's already beaten Phil Davis once. So if he were to lose to Davis, does that give them the opportunity to book the trilogy fight in hopes that that they can promote it properly?
Depends on how good the fight is. That's the one thing about and as a person who's competed, you know this better than I do. You never, even though you can guess, you can try and figure things out. You might be a very smart person. You can never really know what's going to happen in a fight. If it's a competitive fight and it's a close loss, you might be able to get an instant rematch. Goes into the fight and it's not very good, outworked, or worse yet, gets knocked out. That's a big step back, big shot to him. So I'm knocked out by Phil Davis. That's not a fight. And even though Phil Davis has made, I don't think he's made enough where I would say that I'd probably say he fights close to what he does in the UFC. So there's a good chance but I guess if Vader wants a title fight, usually Scott Coker's pretty good about giving people the fights they want. I think he might just put him in with a title fight. I don't think you put him in with McGarry because McGarry is not a wrestler. He's a submission guy. Really hasn't been really prone to being finished by guys in submission, especially. So I don't know that McGarry is necessarily the I don't know the McGarry. I guess McGarry he probably beat McGarry. I guess they're probably just gonna put him in a title shot. It's a big name. Okay? It should get some kind of ratings and it'd be a fight. It would be considered one of the better light heavyweight fights in the world currently, and it's between two former UFC contenders. So there's a lot of ways you could sell it. So I'm guessing they probably most likely put him in with Davis. It's just to me it's a risky call because it's not that they have, and now you've essentially taken title picture for the next couple months, if not years.
So let me ask you this then. We've often talked about what Bellator needs to do in order to get over the hump. Are these the type of signings that helps them go in that right direction?
Yeah, all these signings, these are exactly what they need. I mean, Later he's a name guy, people know him, but he's not a huge name type guy who can either, if he's developed and he's good enough, he could be a champion, or it could be another guy in the division who's a gauge for the other fighters coming up. And what they need is depth. And in welterweight and light heavyweight, legitimate depth, and that's going to have them come up with new matches we haven't seen, and it's going to bring over other people's fan bases, which are going to help their bottom lines. It's going to strengthen the quality of the cards. I mean, I know they have a pay-per-view coming out. They could have Lorenz Larkin come out on that. They could have a title fight between Davis and Bader. I mean, that frees up. Only problem with Bellator isn't talent, is they don't have the depth. And right now they're starting to sign more people to provide the depth. They don't even just need big names. They need who got some familiarity with the MMA community, some experience, because those guys turn into champions, or the worst case scenario, they're gatekeepers, and they can determine whether a prospect's good enough to move to the next stage or they need more work. Bellator didn't have that. There's just a huge gap between the very best and the very worst of the division. And now that they're going to start getting that depth because the UFC is running business now, it's going to give them opportunities to sign these guys who are maybe second or third tier guys, because the UFC is not going to pay for them anymore. They're going to leave it, and some guys aren't even going to get an offer. They're just going to get cut, which means this to round out their divisions and add some legitimacy to their divisions. And the only way you get legitimacy is if you have depth. You can't. It's like a football team or basketball team. If you don't, you can't be a real contender. You can't be a real star team. You can't be a real franchise to have depth. Same thing with Bellator. For them to be a real competitor to the UFC and a star organization, they have now they don't have it, and they're on the way to getting it. So they're the exact moves I would recommend. I've actually been very impressed with them.
That's interesting to hear you say that then. So, are there any free agents that are kind of like on your radar that they should watch to move to sign pretty soon?
First of all, Valerie Letourneau, she fought at flyweight. I think she fought in bantamweight too, or she fought at strawweight. Excuse me. She wanted to fight at flyweight. They don't have a flyweight division in the UFC, and so she doesn't want to be there. Beck Rawley might try and get her released because she said she can't fight in bantamweight. She's not big enough, and she has health issues that impede her from making the strawweight limit. So there's another fight. Letourneau is one of the better fighters. Beck Rawling is kind of a middling fighter at strawweight, but the fact of the matter is she has a name, she has a story, she has a bit of a fan base, and it would flesh out this division and have so they'd be a leg up on the UFC because we have the better featherweight champion, and we have a division the UFC doesn't have that a lot of the UFC fighters want to compete in. There's a lot of girls and can't fit in bantamweight, so now they've opened up this lane where the UFC doesn't have a division to mirror them to compete with them, and there's going to be those weight cuts who are going to want to make a change to those divisions, and I think that's going to happen very soon. So Valerie, I would think of because she would legitimize that division. She's a name. She went 5 rounds strawweight in the world. She was ranked in 2 different divisions. She's got a long history of competition, and she fights with one of the best gyms in the world. So she would be a big pickup for that division. And if they sign her, I was following her. I guarantee you that. If the UFC doesn't come up with a flyweight division, I have no reason to believe they're going to come up with one, which means can't make this weight anymore. I'm going to have to start looking at some alternatives. Think about Mackenzie Dern. She hasn't made weight. She wants to fight in strawweight. She can't make the weight. She's missed it every time. Flyweight would be the best weight for her. But guess what? The UFC doesn't have a flyweight division. So what are her options? Because if she's keep around either.
That's true. That's true there. Speaking of Mackenzie Dern, being a world-class grappler, there is an announcement of a grappling fight that I'm pretty excited for. When we have Gary Toonen and Shinya Aoki doing a grappling match in one championship. Is this a match that you're going to sit down and watch? Aoki has competed on the grappling space before. He hasn't done the greatest. He isn't someone who kind of competes seriously across both sports, but he's someone who's grappling in MMA has created some highlight reel finishes. I mean, he's put the twist on guys in recent memory. So does this match announcement kind of interest you? Is it something that you think you would watch?
I think so. I see why they. He's a huge. He's not maybe the star. He's who elicits a lot of reaction. He knows him in the grappling world and in the MMA world, and he's big in his country. So there's going to be a lot of draw a lot of eyes, especially to see how he does against one there. It's enough of an. I like watching grappling here and there on my own, but when you have somebody that's always going to pull in, I'm more of a casual. So instantly, I recognize Aoki. I'm going to be in this other form of combat. So I'm sure it's going to be enough to get in more than enough other kinds of grappling. A lot of MMA guys, a lot of Japanese MMA people will probably pay attention to it to see how he does. And his grappling style overall is kind of unique. So it's interesting. It's how his style matches up a structured grappler than Aoki. Aoki tries for the most unorthodox things, but I don't know how much of that is he's just that facing guys who are limited grapplers who aren't really.
Who are you talking about?
Aoki. Like in MMA, he's able to, but would he be able to do those things if it was? And he was facing the top end grapplers in the world. That this would answer that question.
Yeah, I think the answer to that question is no. Tunin's going to be the bigger guy, and he's hung in there with bigger men in the past. Hell, he last year him and Usman Paharis had probably the greatest grappling match of 2016, and Paharis outweighed him massively in that fight. I mean, he just submitted a bigger man in Gilbert Burns as well. So, and Gilbert Burns has a hell of a grappling career behind him as well too. He just placed in ADCC the last time around. So it'll be interesting to see how Aoki tries to deal with the bigger fighter in Tonin. I think Tonin wins this via submission, especially with his very leg lock attacking. But just the announcement itself, still, it causes me to have interest in this, especially along the lines with Dylan Dennis signing to Bellator as well. It definitely gets me interested in the fight, and it's something I want to see.
And a lot of, like a grappling version of Mayweather McGregor. It's like for all intents and purposes, Aoki is winning this. He's not a full time grappling chops. He's had some, but those accomplishments aren't really recent. They wouldn't put him in as one of the top grapplers, or even in the modern times. And you're having him go up against a guy who's going to be the bigger guy and considered to be one in the world. So the result should be fairly obvious to us. The only thing that makes it important is because it's a big name from another sport coming into somebody to compete.
Mm-hmm.
So
I definitely agree with you on that. I'm looking forward to it. I can't wait to see it.
You want to watch, unless Aoki submits him, you're not going to be shocked by anything that happens. Even though you kind of know what's going to happen, because it's an event. It's like an event, basically. It's big names. You want to see it, and I think that's what's going to draw people in. It would draw more people in if there was an actual feel or a belief that this guy could win it. But I don't think even most MMA fans who are familiar with MMA really believe that he's going to actually win this fight. He's not, like you said, he's not, and he's a skilled grappler, but he's not used to regularly competing with this caliber guy in a competition setting in a purely grappling. So there's a lot of things disadvantaged in matchups.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see like the commentary surrounding this fight right before it happens. I believe that a lot of people are going to be on the side of Tune-In just because of how good he's been doing in recent memory. But it definitely got me excited to see that this fight announced. What are some other big stories that you're following in MMA? This is kind of a slow week for us, which is a good thing to have every now and then, especially with the month of April that's coming up. What are some stories that you're watching this week in mixed martial arts?
A lot of stuff. A lot of the stuff I'm just watching is I'm still trying to figure out what the to do, like what their end game is, what they're going. You just kind of wonder, I know they have a big roster, but you kind of wonder how much of an effect this is going to have long term on the quality of the fights and the quality of the card. Really, just cut down on the amount of card, like cut it down so much because they want to have the highest quality and save money, which means best of the best are going to be fighting. Is that going to affect the roster? How much is it going to affect the amount of shows produced? The standing of the organization as a whole? Because I know people only get concerned when their favorite fighter gets cut, but this sort of thing impacts like the whole sport across the board. If the UFC is not paying and they're the best people paying, smaller organizations are going to be paying now. Bridge anymore.
Yeah, it's going to be something to see. Something of interest to watch over these next few months. I think this is going to be a big year for mixed martial arts as well. Not a big year in like saying revenue generating or something like that. I mean like a big year in what is happening within the sport. What's next? What's the next big growth opportunity? Who's the next big champion? I think we're headed in that direction to kind of see not only if these questions get answered, but if they can be answered and if they could be answered by whom. I think that is going to be a pretty interesting time in the sport, and I'm looking forward to seeing what happens.
The only other thing I'm kind of interested in is seeing if every time somebody has a star, this guy, I'm kind of interested in seeing if the UFC can actually create stars, because a lot of the people who are their veterans, like Cain Velasquez, he's on the tail end of his career. Fabricio Verdum, he's still a top guy, but he's at his age, given his experience, he's on the end of his career. There's closer to the end than they are, and the UFC hasn't shown that they've developed any other. Is I mean, we're gonna find out how important that. They don't have any transcendent guys fighting. I mean, even if GSP comes back, he's not coming back for like 5 or 6 years. He might not fight after this, depending on how it goes. Ronda McGregor is just trying to get paid. They haven't developed any stars, and I'm kind of curious to see if they can actually develop stars. They haven't really had to. They've kind of lucked into people, or the name UFC has been the big. Given some of the decisions they made, people on to anything that says UFC understand what they're trying to do. They don't understand what they're getting anymore as far as the quality or the level of matchups anymore. So it's kind of interesting to see if they can really develop a legitimate star who can help them push pay-per-view ratings back up. Because as it stands right now, they don't really have any.
So with that being said, what are you working on this week for MMA ratings?
I did one. I over regarding Lena Landsberg. She fought Cyborg a couple months ago. She came in one of those catchweight fights, and I did an article official fight at bantamweight, and she's a new entry in bantamweight, who women's bantamweight blood, and I kind of discussed here what that win meant for her, some potential matchups moving forward, try to give a bit an idea of who she is and where she can go and what you should be looking for in future matchups. That's the only piece I in recent. I got some other pieces I've got for future matchups coming up, and I've actually done like 3 or 4 for UFC 210, but we won't be seeing those till. But that's what I'm gonna have coming out on the site this week.
Okay, that's some good stuff. I got some pieces up about Joe Duffy, and
I like the Joe Duffy piece. That was you stated a very well thought out case on that one. I wasn't really big. I obviously went against you when I was thinking about it for what I thought. The way you presented it, I could either side as far as how he should approach and the UFC moving forward. I thought that was a very good job you did with that.
yeah, man, it's all about. I appreciate that. It's all about cashing out at the right time, and I think Joe Duffy did that correctly. I did a piece on Jimmy Manoa. I might have another piece coming up later on this week. I am going to be covering the Glory event for Fight Metric this weekend, so it should be pretty interesting just to kind of watch that and get a different eye on a different aspect of fight sports. But other than that, man, I'm putting together some work. I'm going to do a piece on a pretty big piece on competitive grappling for Bloody Elbow. That'll be coming out probably in April. I want to put that together, and
you were determined to make competitive grappling popular. I can see
dog,
that,
man, because it's so much fucking fun. Like that's the basis of it. Like you have weekend warriors, you have dads, you have moms, you have lawyers, doctors, you have guys that are competing against men who are are like janitors. Everybody's equal, so it's interesting to me to see competitive grappling on a wide scale grow. I do have some issues with some of the bigger names in the sport and the way they conduct themselves, and I do have some issues with the IBJJF and the way they ref their events, but that's neither here nor there. I'm a fan of grappling, and it's something that it deserves the attention that I hope is coming its way.
Oh no, I admire it. I admire the fact so fiercely. I'm just like, he's really everything in his power to make competitive grappling into the next big thing.
Everything in my power. Everything in my power. But I got that coming up. I'm keeping a close eye on this Conor McGregor Floyd Mayweather crap, just because I think it's either time to shit or get off the pot, and I hope that they hurry up and make something happen so we can actually begin talking about it as if it's an actual thing.
Yeah, that would be good to make a decision, but with that kind of money, the thing I find funny is how White turned his opinion around. First, it was never going to happen. He's got to deal with us, and all of a sudden now it's just too much money. And I actually heard somebody, I don't know who told me this, but I actually heard a rumor that the UFC WME may be trying to do a co-promotion with Mayweather Promotions, because this kind of fight would generate tons and tons of money, and they paid a lot of money for the UFC. So what do they need? They needed cash generated. So if they could
cash money,
if they could get in on the promotion and the pay-per-view, they could probably make 6 or 7 UFC. I mean, it would blow anything they do with the UFC out of the water, and that might make up a huge chunk of that money they thinking they were coming into a organization full of stars, transcendent stars who can make millions and millions for them. They know that's not the case now, and they see that money that's being offered to McGregor and the money they'll get for sharing the rights and replaying the fight. That's some, we're talking about, $500 million. They're gonna take that. They're gonna take it because they need to keep the lights on. They need to make good on their investment, and that's the closest way to cut into that debt they have.
Definitely is, and that's something that they need to do, and that they need to do ASAP. So with that in mind, I also wanted to talk about. Excuse me. I just wanted to say, thank you to everyone that supports the show. Everyone who likes and shares our content. Please keep doing that. You can find us every week, whether it be Thursday or Wednesday or Thursday, talking about mixed martial arts on MMA Ratings Podcast. So again, I definitely appreciate everyone following us, liking our content, because we are steadily growing, and I think that we're headed in the right direction.
Yeah, I agree 100%. We're just gonna keep to get you the best interviews, and like I said, we try to. We don't just break down fights. We talk money. We talk social issues that impact the sport as a whole. We're trying to cover all the bases and do so in an effective and intelligent manner for the fans. So we do the best we can to get you the best written content and the best audio content out there.
That is exactly right. So with that in mind, man, I'll catch you next week, and enjoy the week off with no action or no major MMA events.
Oh, I just started getting into grappling and kickboxing, so I'll probably hit the mats maybe this weekend. Then I gotta get some more rounds in on that. A little rusty. Getting kicked and punched isn't as fun as it used to be. But it's
Hey,
still
man,
something
we're all rusty, to be honest with you.
all right.
So with that in mind, man, have a great rest of the week.
All right, you too, man. Appreciate it.
All right, man. Peace.